CGA Tour, a podcast unlike any other. Now your host, Calvin Alexander.
Welcome back to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. As always here, I'm your host, Calvin Glen Alexander. And tonight's episode, I'm joined by Jake Carlson and Will Polk to talk about the Big 12. Got to get an OU guy in the house to at least give us the non-OSU biased opinions and the OU biased opinions instead. Granted, I think we all take that with a grain of salt, right? We're all trying to be a little bit careful, be more straightforward. But
Definitely.
All that being said, shout out to Walter Agnich for giving me the super biased opinions when it comes to OU, Thunder, anything else. Is a guy we all know. But, well, I got to ask you, how's it going? How's Dallas, right?
Yeah, Dallas is good. Living back up in the burbs now. Back up at home for a little bit in between places. Got to move in with the fiance eventually. But Dallas is good. Good season for the Cowboys so far. We were just talking about that, but can't complain.
Yeah. Cowboys Chargers Super Bowl. Get the rematch.
I wouldn't complain.
See you guys there. I wouldn't complain either. That would be great. That was an amazing game to start out the season.
Yeah, that was. And you saw it in person too, even better.
Oh yeah. It was except for the very last couple seconds when it didn't go our way, went the other way. But,
yeah, sure.
Hey, you know what? At least our stadiums aren't falling apart, right, Jake?
Yeah, at least we also don't have a bus driver as our quarterback.
Bus driver. Justin Herbert, 6'6". I don't think he can sit in a bus regularly, man.
It's the Dak joke. It's the Dak. Dak's a bus driver.
His QBR has gone down 20 points this year. Weird.
I'm not going to dignify that with a response.
But you know what? You know what though? It doesn't matter because guess what? The Cowboys clinched the division like 2 weeks ago or whatever.
Easy too.
While the Chargers were losing to the Texans in Houston.
I think
that's a tough division though.
I think I texted everybody week one and said I genuinely think the Cowboys will win the division, and our friend Sam was like, "Don't say that," and I was like, "No, I'm not joking."
He's got a very strong opinions on Mike McCarthy, which I wouldn't say I have as strong opinions, but I do kind of side with him on it. But
yeah, I was pretty confident the Cowboys would win the division pretty easily, and I was right, which I'm happy about. So,
why would you not be happy about being right?
And we get our new sick logo in a month.
Ooh. What's
February
your guess for the
2nd.
new name?
The Guardians. I'm just kidding.
The Cleveland already did that. Yeah, I was gonna say.
I don't know. I hope they make it alliteration, or I think my hope of them making it capital based, like I don't know, the 3 other professional sports franchises in the Washington D.C. Metroplex. I think that's long gone because they released like teaser images of the same colors that I don't like very much.
I think the kind of dark red and gold is pretty iconic though. Like I don't think you want to get rid of that immediately.
No, I wish they did more of like a USC type opposed to like there's almost like too much brown in their red.
Okay, that's fair.
Well, I got an idea for you, Jake. Basically, let's say Caleb Williams, currently in the transfer portal, transfers to USC, and then he gets drafted number 1 overall by Washington a year or 2 later. Never changes uniform colors again, and you're good.
Never changes reds. He goes
from crimson red to whatever
USC. I knew something
Southern California.
I saw the wheels turning.
I was trying to segue it away from the NFL into what we actually want to talk about on today's podcast, which is the Big 12. So I was like, how can I segue this the best? And all just kind of clicked and lined up all together at the end there. So thank you.
And Caleb Williams from the DC area.
That was the cherry on top point. But glad you point that out there. So with being said here, we definitely want to talk about some Big 12 football. Definitely talk more about OU, OSU, both winning their bowl games, as well as, honestly, a bunch of other Big 12 teams winning their bowl games, except for Iowa State and West Virginia. So shout out to both of those schools this year.
The
Iowa State, though.
That Iowa State bowl game. Has there ever been a more Brock Purdy play in Brock Purdy's career?
So let's just jump into it here. The biggest disappointment of any Big 12 school this season has to be Iowa State, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think I'm disappointed by OU season, obviously, but Iowa State was top 10 as well preseason, and
It,
they finished what 7-6 with the bowl loss. Like,
Iowa State is probably the most disappointing Power 5 school. Like
Yeah.
I would put A&M in there, but like A&M beat Alabama.
do you mean
so,
like in general just in general in NCAA athletics? Because like
Yeah.
basketball's pretty good for them right now.
Oh, yeah,
Besides Baylor loss, like they're
Yeah, I
kind
think
of
just
yeah,
in
just in
football.
football.
Yeah.
okay.
I don't know.
I don't
Like,
know.
they were
Ohio
preseason top
State's
10.
Ohio State's got to be up there a little bit. They lost to Oregon early on. That was pretty. But I agree. I think it's
Yeah.
Iowa State, but I think there's a conversation more of like, okay, so Iowa State, Brock Purdy, Brees Hall, we're getting like Heisman Trophy dark horse ideas,
Mhm.
and then one opts out of the game, and the other one is 23 of 39 with 204 yards and a touchdown in the bowl game, where they scored 13 points total. It just is. And throw a pick on, it's just Brock Purdy is not the guy. Spencer Sanders, on the other hand, much better than Brock Purdy. I think we've started out, Jake and I have, like going into every season going, okay, would you take this quarterback or this quarterback? And to be honest, going into this season, it would have been, oh yeah, I'll take Brock Purdy over Spencer Sanders.
Yeah.
We've seen Sanders have 5 turnovers against Texas Tech, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a couple years ago now, and it's granted, it's way in the rear view, and we hope it's really far in the rear view, but it's Brock Purdy, Brees Hall. This Iowa State team's going to be tough. They've got a tight end who's going to be drafted top 3 rounds in Kolar, right? So
Kolar is just absurdly good. I mean, I think he lived up to expectations at least this year.
For sure.
Brees obviously did too, but the team as a whole just.
well, when Iowa State, as I look at their whole entire season, when they play us, so when they play Oklahoma State, they have only lost, well, I say only, they've lost 2 games. They've lost to Baylor by 2 points, at Baylor, and they've lost to Iowa. So, okay, not that bad. They're okay. And then when they beat Oklahoma State, it's like, all right, like hats off to you. Pretty much got a not easy road ahead, but okay. You're setting your sights on winning out, being okay. And
It's
then it
much
was at West
easier.
Virginia.
The back half of their schedule was like there were a lot more wins dispersed in there than the front half. Now, granted, we didn't know when Baylor beat Iowa State. I was like, oh, Baylor beat Iowa State. I didn't know Baylor was going to be what they were this year. But yeah, Iowa State just like, I don't know how you have. Weren't Kolar and Brees Hall both All-Americans?
I think so, but definitely
Brees.
Kolar.
I thought Brees Hall was too. I
It
think they
wouldn't surprise
both
me
were.
if both were. I just can't remember off the top.
But that's bad. That's how do you have 2 All-Americans and you're that bad?
Yeah, but also when I'm thinking about an Iowa State team, I don't think about them scoring a ton of points or allowing a ton of points to be scored. So when I see them beat UNLV 48-3, I'm like, okay, this is really good. They held UNLV to 3 and they scored, they won by 45 points. How could you ever talk bad about that game? But then when Baylor scores 31 on them, it's like, okay, so is Baylor good? Is Iowa State bad? And of course, they beat KU easily. They beat K-State by 13. And they beat us by 3. Okay, all right. Iowa State's fine. They're okay. They lost to Iowa and they had a blip against Baylor, but they could still play in the Big 12 championship game. And really, they could have, I think, all the way until they lost to OU. But that
was the
West Virginia
clunkiest
loss
offensive
and the
showing.
Texas
God.
Tech loss were horrible. I don't know how you get over that. Right?
Well, Tech was when the kicker kicked like a 60-yarder, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that was. Oh.
But we're talking about a Tech team that was 3-6 in conference, and one of those 3 wins is against Iowa State. Bizarre. Another win's against Kansas. We know that. I don't know who else.
Most
Texas
teams
beats,
can chalk
but
that one up to a dub every year.
Yeah.
Besides Texas. My roommate, I don't know if you can hear me.
The emphasis on most was pretty heavy.
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Most, but not all. Not all have the luxury of
Some.
Kansas.
Yeah, some, not all. Yeah. I mean, I'm currently looking at the Bleacher Report 2021 Big 12 preview, and it's Spencer Rattler, Bijan Robinson, Mike Rose out of Iowa State, Deuce Vaughn, out of K-State, right? And then it's like, okay, what are the whole storylines here? And it's, can Iowa State win its first conference championship since 1912? The answer was
No.
no. Just to be clear, just the answer was no. I mean, they lost, and not to necessarily spend 30 minutes on Iowa State, but goodness gracious, that could not. Their season just plummeted.
And I'm
Bigger,
trying to think of
like,
what players
yeah.
off that list that you mentioned lived up to expectation. I mean, I know Deuce Vaughn did, but
Deuce
obviously
Vaughn,
expectations
yeah.
weren't sky high for them. He did go off last night, though. That was pretty impressive. But I just can't think of a player on that list that lived. Maybe Mike Rose, because he's pretty good, and I think their defense was pretty highly ranked this year, also. But I mean, Rattler obviously, Bijan started off hot, but that team just fell apart and he got hurt. So I can't think of a player on that list that did anything. Just shows you how
Yeah.
off kilter the Big 12 was this year.
Yeah, and also maybe Boyd Report's just out of touch because we've seen.
Also
I
true.
don't know about I don't know about you, Will, but as an Oklahoma State fan, so Gundy says after the PlayStation Fiesta Bowl victory, he says, "Yeah, hey, we have a logo too, right?" And apparently, because he tweeted out stats later, or he tweeted out a photo of stats, but whatever it may be, of how many people were watching the Oklahoma State game. So that's more or less what I think he was getting at. But also, I think he was getting at the fact that there were several different ESPN graphics that were put up where it was the OU logo and it would say OU, say Oklahoma versus
Mhm.
Notre Dame. Do you notice that as an OU fan? Do you notice that type of stuff at all whenever it's you guys instead of us getting, because it's never the other way around, let's be honest. So do you notice when that stuff happens? Because it happened like 3 or 4
I
times,
mean,
didn't
yeah,
make
with
huge
things like
waves,
that,
but
and then I know. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but then I remember at the beginning of the Big 12 championship game, there was something from a ref who like slipped up into like Oklahoma versus Baylor or whatever, and it was like, okay, come on, dude, like, come on, that's a really dumb mistake. Like, I'm not going to be like an OU homer and be like, oh, well, it's because that's our second home, but like, it's just like, come on, like,
Well, and Calvin equated it to like a Michigan State thing. It's
yeah, I mean,
very and your
I
mom went
sent
to
Jake. I sent
your mom
yeah.
went to
My mom
Michigan
went to
State,
Michigan
so it's the
State, so
same.
I've been a huge Michigan State fan like my whole life. Like one of my first sports memories is of Mateen Cleaves in 2000 and all. So I've been a Michigan State fan longer than an OU fan actually. So I kind of understand that mindset. Like I sent Jake a comment on Reddit, like a little thread a while back that was like someone said that Michigan State always reminded them of like the Big Ten, Oklahoma State, and I was like, yeah, I don't see any fault with that logic at all. So I'd like to think I can kind of understand it, but
I mean, I've seen some Jim Harbaugh and Mike Gundy comparisons, of course, because both played quarterback at the school they
yeah.
currently coach at. But other than that, there are a lot of Michigan State similarities. Just because we're talking about two schools who I think are undervalued, is probably the wrong word, but are definitely like on the rise in their states, respectively.
Yeah.
But talking about a Michigan team that this was their first year making the college football playoff, I think, if I'm right. So Michigan State made it
Oh yeah.
first. So that's
Yeah.
way bigger in the column for Michigan State than it is
Neither
Oklahoma
had a good
State.
showing, but
Yeah. Well, but I mean, when it comes down to it, like if Oklahoma State had made the playoffs this year, who knows? Who knows what team would have shown up? Is it the team that played Notre Dame in the second half or the first half? Or is the team that played against Iowa State? Or is the team that, and Baylor? Or the team that played against, for lack of a better term here, like, second half Notre Dame, but
I mean, like,
or first half, or second half OU, but not first half, and some other stuff too with it. Like it's, or the team that played against Texas Tech and Lubbock. Like that game, Oklahoma State fans had to be weirded out because we're used to scoring a ton of points, but at the same point, we're weirded out in a good way because we won and we held them to nothing. So,
yeah,
or 3.
Well, and I had a couple people like non-OSU, like coworkers and stuff like that, text me and say, I think OSU probably puts up a better fight against Georgia than Michigan did. Now, obviously, hindsight's 2020. Calvin and I talked about it. I don't know if we necessarily agree. I think if we played Alabama, it'd probably look exactly the same because I don't think Cincinnati got like blown out. They got manhandled, but Alabama sat on cruise control the whole game. Georgia blew out Michigan. Like they did not care. They're like, whatever. You guys thought this would be a close game. It's not going to be a close game. I personally don't think we get annihilated like that. But that's I don't know. That's my opinion.
I'd say it this way. I think Michigan plays much more similarly to Notre Dame than we play similarly to Cincinnati or Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Michigan aligns more. So if we had been able to beat out Georgia, we probably would have beat Michigan, or at least gave them a good fair shot. That wasn't going to happen though. Like from how everything went down, Alabama beat Georgia, and all of a sudden it's like, all right, well, we weren't even going to make it anyways, right? Big 12 championship winner wasn't going to make it. Granted, I think if we had blown out Baylor in the Big 12 championship, beat like, throw out a score of like 35-10 or something, right? Where it wasn't a game the whole time, and it's kind of an achievable type of, we're not beating Baylor 35-0, or 58-3. So,
Mhm.
35-10 seems more realistic of this hypothesis. Then maybe we jump Cincinnati, but still such a tough thing that we're really going on about. What is interesting is when I look back at Cincinnati's record this year, and my youngest brother, Luke, was talking to me about this. He goes, well, Cincinnati only played Notre Dame, and Notre Dame didn't play anyone. And Jake and I talked about that quite a bit. Notre Dame didn't play really any good school.
Sam Howell was the best quarterback they faced all year.
Yeah, and their first game of the season, they go to overtime against Florida State. So, what's the point?
And
So
they ruined Mackenzie Milton's Hollywood moment, basically.
I know, seriously.
Would have been
That
so
would have
nice for
been
him.
just incredible.
Surprise appearance, Mackenzie Milton at the Fiesta Bowl. He was there
cool.
on the field, accepting an award for Comeback Player of the Year.
Nice.
The
Awesome.
Fiesta. I think the Fiesta Bowl has their own Comeback Player of the Year. Maybe there was something else going on, but
that's awfully slick of them.
It was cool.
That.
It was cool. It was nice. Yeah, it's good to see.
Was it at halftime?
Maybe or during the third quarter.
If it was
they
at
got scared. They started shaking.
Wow.
I'm missing something.
Well, because he came in when he was at Florida State, he came in against Notre Dame and at halftime, and then remember Notre Dame completely just
and he
didn't know
engineered
how to
that
anymore.
comeback. Basically,
Yeah.
They took it to OT. So, I think Jake and I are on the same page here. We think that if that award was awarded halftime, completely changed the mojo of the game.
Yeah. Can we confirm that he wasn't playing and Spencer Sanders was? Is that?
Maybe Mackenzie Milton came in during the second quarter with a minute 30 left and was the media guy. Because, something happened. So, regardless of that, Jake and I discussed kind of at length here earlier this week, the Oklahoma State win in the Fiesta Bowl. I have a couple of stat corrections here. Oklahoma State did not have a 30-point comeback. We scored 30 points straight. Also, we did not hold Notre Dame scoreless in the second half. Notre Dame did score 7, of course, there at the very end. So I just had to make a couple stat corrections. But with that being said, I got to ask you questions, right? Like you're somebody who's been on the podcast before. I think you're a little bit more level-headed, as I made fun of myself and Jake and a couple other buddies here recently on this episode so far about being more level-headed. But I also know, you're an OU fan. You're not going to just, demolish the program. So how shocked were you when Lincoln Riley left? Start there.
Incredibly. There's no other way to really put it. I remember I was driving back from visiting my fiance who lives in Edmond currently. And it was Thanksgiving weekend too, so I was up there for that. I was driving back and I saw the news pop up, and of course I texted Jake and I was like, "Call me when you get a chance. I need to process, vent and all." And
no,
PJ
I think
actually texted. Oh, go ahead.
You called me and I was asleep.
Yeah, yeah. So I sent him a text. I was like, "I need someone to talk to, man." I was my mind was just so blown at the fact that had even happened. And PJ texted me and he said that Nat, my fiance, had tried to call his wife because they're obviously good friends and accidentally called PJ, and he answered and he was like, "How pissed is Will?" And Nat said, "Incredibly." No, it was just such a shocker, especially after how Bedlam ended. And all season long, I'm not going to lie, things did feel a little off. But to so vocally shut down the LSU interest and all the night of the game, I was like, okay, we should be good then. That's that was the name everyone kept hearing. Is USC. No one had heard anything about USC up until that day. And then it was either Feldman or Thamel who tweeted out "Oh, look for USC to make a push for Lincoln Riley." And I was like, okay, that's acceptable. Obviously we have a pretty, I'd say, good football coach at head coach. Obviously USC wants to make a splash. They'll try and make that splash. But it went from could make a move for him to he's the next head coach in the span of like an hour. And I was driving and I just said, what the actual, you can fill in whatever word you want to there.
Bleep. Yeah.
Yeah. But just, man, like it was just really shocking to me because I never really considered Lincoln Riley leaving. I mean, I guess I didn't see him as like the head coach in like 10 years because obviously the NFL interest is always going to be there. And that's where I thought he would go. And I know Jake and I had actually talked about that this season, that not that he was going to go to the NFL, but that would be the only place I could see him going. So to see him go to USC was obviously quite the system shock for me and for, a few other people also.
Yeah.
And like, Lincoln taking that USC job to me is like taking a broken step down. It just, I think I rationalized in my head. I was like, well, if Lincoln got offered like Ohio State, for example, if you want to go to the side, maybe you don't want to coach in the SEC. I don't think that's even true. I don't think that's why he took the USC job in the first place.
I don't think so either. I mean,
I don't think it had
like a kind of the cope, but
it's an easy cop out, I guess. For not for him, but for other OU fans that maybe want to feel justified.
I will say I don't think it was because he wanted to avoid the SEC, but I will say that I do think he made the move because he wanted to have an easier path to the postseason.
Correct.
Because obviously OU's going to the SEC in the next 4 years at some time. I don't know what the timeline's very. Timeline is a social construct in this case. Who knows?
Time is a flat circle. Crushes
but
I don't
obviously
know.
Pac-12. I mean, besides Oregon, every once in a while the Pac-12, and Oregon was a pretty good team this year, I will say. Their bowl performance is not indicative of that. They had a lot of guys out, opt-outs, injuries, COVID, and whatnot. But the Pac-12 obviously is down as a league. Oregon's the best team in it, and they could. I mean, even with the full strength team, I think that would have been a great game between Oregon and a pretty depleted Oklahoma. So I think Lincoln sees that opportunity there. That okay, I can go in, get my guys in, recruit like crazy because we already had those California connections and all. And obviously, we've seen all the 2023 guys and a couple 22s like decommit and immediately flip to USC that are from LA and SoCal. So he has that really easy like recruiting ground there. Pretty easy conference situation. I think in a couple years they'll easily for sure be in the playoff conversation again. But I think he knows that too. And I think that was probably the biggest driving idea behind making the move. So I'm not going to be like, oh, he's soft, but I think he definitely wanted to have a more assured path to the playoff and all, because I mean, I can't really fault that.
And I mean, even Calvin left Oklahoma for Los Angeles.
I haven't lived in Oklahoma since I haven't lived in Oklahoma permanently since May of 2018.
The last time I lived there.
You were there in June. Yeah. I left a month earlier than you. Yeah.
It's my favorite comment that I see all the time. Well, saw all the time in the immediate aftermath of that was all the real Okies be like, well, he's going out there to pay a ton in taxes and all. And I'm like, do you know how much his contract is going to be?
One, we will never know. Unless he tells us, we won't really know. USC is a private school, so we won't have we won't know exactly what he got paid. Two, the rumors swirling around what he was offered incentively of they buy his current house, purchase him a new house, private plane, like whatever. It won't matter. Like the taxes part, cool.
Exactly.
Yeah. How much? Yeah. You probably know. Yeah. Everyone knows what they are offered right from the job. They can figure it out, whatever, they calculate it, and then they figure out what the difference is. I mean, that's just, I think, something everyone does. But it's not like it really matters when you're getting paid more than, $6 million a year, right? Like, what kind of lifestyle do you have to have where you're like, I don't know if I can afford to keep doing my current lifestyle because of the taxes, right? Like, it's just, it's like, you need to change your lifestyle if you're getting paid $11 million a year, rumored. Granted, maybe it's 7 or 9. But, Brent Venables going from Carolina to Oklahoma, he probably doesn't have too much change in taxes, but could pay $2 million more a year,
too.
Or $3 million more a year, whatever it was. It was,
I will say though that point does kind of hold true for some of the assistants and all, because I know there's a little bit of staff attrition for Lincoln's USC staff, and there already has been so far. Because obviously those guys aren't making like $11 million a year and all. Like, I know Jamar Kane has already moved on to LSU. Tibbs went to SMU instead of even considering USC and all. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how he builds out the rest of his coaching staff, because everyone thought immediately, oh, he's going to take everyone from OU, and ended up just taking pretty much the defensive guys.
Well, one thing we will know about USC is they will have a very overhyped but middling defense.
Yeah.
Because they took Alex Grinch. They took Alex Grinch. That's the joke.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I've got takes on Alex Grinch. I'll save him for another day. But
well, what are your takes on Brent Venables? Because I honestly, Jake's heard this too. He came over from Clemson, has a great record of coaching up NFL talent guys on the defensive side, but OU, and when I think of OU, I think of Heisman Trophy contending quarterbacks. I don't think of really much else. It kind of, I mean, that is such a huge highlight. It really does make me think, I need to think some more about OU. So what do you think of when they hire a defensive coach and Brent Venables?
And I agree that the perception of OU the last couple of years has become like offense. We're going to throw the ball 30 plus times a game. We're going to score 50, 45 plus a game. We're going to have a quarterback who at least finishes like third in the Heisman voting and all. But when Stoops came in and we won a national championship, that was off the strength of the defense. The offense was good, but I mean, that was a defensively won national championship. So, I mean, we have had that perception and that kind of rep before. And I think Brent's going to bring us back to that. I mean, it's pretty clear that he can compete with the big dogs and all, and his defense has been tried and true and the biggest games of them all. And I think it's been great for recruiting, obviously. Pulled in a lot of guys. And I really don't have any complaints about the hire, to be honest. Like, I know Jake and I talked about it ad nauseum and all, and sure there's bigger names that were maybe out there, maybe talked to and all, but I just really don't have any issues with it. Like, I'm not going to say I'm like, oh, we're going to win a national championship in a year, but like, it's going to be like, just like Bob Stoops, like he's going to take a year and then win a natty the next year. But I think Brent's a great hire. I think he's going to have us right on track. And I think a lot of that was obviously the hire had to look forward to the conference realignment and all. And I think Brent's the guy for that too.
Well, there is one thing I have to tell you though. Do you know what year Josh Heupel won the Heisman?
I do.
Do you know who was like the offensive team of the year? Was
I probably
OU in 2000. So
you know how good the defense was then too.
Defense. I'm not saying there weren't, but for him to say it was mainly defense is a little.
Well, it's just because the head coach was a former DC and all.
Yeah, no, I mean I got you on that standpoint for sure. Just there was a lot of offensive help too. And then when I think of like historically,
you can't win a national championship
without a great offense, right? Yeah, and I'm with you on that. I just think Heupel was named the head coach of somebody's edited this guy's Wikipedia page. Did Heupel get fired or did he resign from Tennessee? No, he did not. Somebody's messed with this Wikipedia page. Right now. Somebody's messed with this Wikipedia page. I'll send this to you guys here in a second. There's literally Josh Heupel's Wikipedia says Heupel was named the 27th head coach of Tennessee on January 27th, 2021. He resigned today to become the new head coach at Boise State. Doubtful that happened. So I'll send you guys this here.
Unless we're just breaking news right now, but I don't think that's reality.
Google Josh Heupel. I can't. Well, but if I Googled Josh Heupel and the first thing came up was Wikipedia, I doubt it's true.
That's wild.
So Josh Heupel, Boise State. Anyways, I should delete that from the podcast because I guarantee you it's just fake. But with that being said, how do you feel about? I'll kind of get into more of the fun topics here with OU, right? Like Brent Venables, I think OU is going to be probably still pretty darn good, right? Like it's not like you guys fall off. I remember as an Oklahoma State fan for every single year that there would be the Sam Bradford, even Rhett Bomar, to be honest, but the Sam Bradford, the Landry Jones, the
Trevor Knight,
Josh White, Jason White, Josh Heupel, but I mean, how many quarterbacks we can go? Blake Bell, current NFL tight end. However many quarterbacks we can go, it's always been like, okay, well, all right, but this next year will be Oklahoma State's. Like this next year, and it's just like, no, well, not necessarily, because OU doesn't rebuild, they reload, right? So how do you feel about Dillon Gabriel and the team going for this next season?
I do like Gabriel. I mean, obviously my expertise just comes from the few UCF games I've watched the last couple of years and looking at his stats and watching YouTube highlights, obviously, which we're going to be showing him in a pretty favorable light. But I mean, I like what I see. Like, he can spin it. He's got a good arm, pretty good arm talent. But I'm not going to say he's like an immediate pound for pound replacement for like a guy like Caleb Williams. But I think he's got potential to be like the top quarterback in the Big 12 because we don't know how Ewers is going to be.
Yeah.
And Iowa State doesn't have a guy anymore because Purdy's done, I'm pretty sure.
What about Gary Bohannon?
He's a good player, but I mean, you see that kind of
that 5 for 15 game against Ole Miss really sold it to me.
Well, you made my point for me, Jake. So thank you. But I think Gabriel's great, and I mean, he obviously knows the system that's being installed and played pretty well in it in the past in 2019 at UCF. But now he's just surrounded by better talent. So I think it's a pretty good marriage of quarterback and system and talent around him.
I think Dylan Gabriel will be pretty darn good, but I also think he was decent already. I don't think why we'd see it drop off, right? I mean, as you're saying, he can spin it. He's not a bad quarterback necessarily.
I don't think he's going to be worse, if that makes sense.
Worse than
obviously than he's been. So
well, and he did come from a Gus Malzahn offense, so he's good at running unrealistically complex things, which I guess is a very good thing because Levy's offense isn't as complex, and that's not like knocking Levy because Gus Malzahn likes to have like 8 moving parts all at once.
Yeah, definitely.
But I don't know. I'm interested to see the Caleb Williams stuff as everybody is, but like I guess like what are your expectations? Because Calvin and I talked about it, and I just don't see a world where Dylan Gabriel commits to OU to compete for a job when he could go start it. Again, he would probably start for every other Big 12 team.
Yeah, and so the point that came up was, and this is obviously reading super deep, and this honestly isn't even my take. Like a buddy of mine was kind of breaking this down for me the other night when Gabriel committed and whatnot. And his post about it was all about like taking a gamble, like taking a leap of faith, like gambling on his talents and all to come to OU. So people were like, okay, well, does that mean there's gonna be a competition? Does that mean the incumbent is still gonna be there? And I was like, okay, it'd be really cool if there was a competition between Dylan Gabriel and Caleb Williams. Like that's a win-win situation right there. I don't think that's gonna happen, obviously. But it's not like he was immediately going to become the starter at UCLA either, because I think DTR has another year of eligibility, and I think he's a pretty good quarterback. I don't think he lived up to the Heisman dark horse expectations that Jake and I talked about before the season. But
isn't he really young
good,
too?
Though. No, he's a senior. He was class of 18, I think.
Gosh,
recruiting.
I just feel like he's been there so long.
So I know I'm pretty sure he has another year eligibility because I know I saw something about UCLA fans were unsure if he's going to come back or not, and that's why the team went out and picked up Gabriel. So it's not like that spot was guaranteed at UCLA either, because obviously you'd have to beat out another incumbent if DTR decided to come back. So it's pretty clear that Gabriel's down to kind of gamble on himself and all. But I mean, that being said, like I said, I don't think that means Caleb is obviously coming back and competing, which I'm sure we're going to get into hypothetical destinations for him. And there are a few out there, but unfortunately, I think it's coming down to everyone's first guess for him and where he's going to end up.
Well, so I have some family who went to UCLA I have 2 family members who are actually UCLA season ticket holders. And I talked to my uncle and grandfather about it, actually. I talked to my grandfather earlier today about it. I was like, hey, what do you think about the whole transfer portal to Gabriel leaving, et cetera? And he had heard or seen enough information to be like, yeah, I don't get it. I don't get why he'd leave, but that has to mean that during that DTR is coming back, and it has to mean that Gabriel was going to either be the backup or was going to be there long enough to either transfer again to a different school besides OU even, or just stay in UCLA until he could figure out if he's going to play or not. Because Gabriel, I think, has 2 or 3 more years left, right? So he has at least 2.
I saw a breakdown of that because he had last year's obviously the medical red shirt because he broke his clavicle. The year before was COVID year, so that's a free year of eligibility. So he's got 3 left. And I mean, I don't know if I can see him staying all 3 because I mean, I'm not sure about his NFL prospects, but I feel like at some point he'll kind of get the message of, okay, I got to try my luck, and like it'll be time to move the next guy in. But
Well, what do you see as more of like a realistic setting where Gabriel comes in, does the Kyler Murray deal where he sits for a year but plays like weirdly like 2 plays or something in the Rose Bowl? I know Murray played like a couple more plays than that, of course, throughout the season, but he does that type of deal where he sits behind a guy like Williams if Williams decides to come back, or do you think it's more realistic that Gabriel went to OU hours after Caleb Williams enters the transfer portal because hey, why not? Like
oh yeah,
it's
the latter,
I
of
mean,
course, yeah.
we know OU's a bigger brand than UCLA every single day of the week and a bigger team and a better team to play for, regardless of how murky and muddy this offseason's been for OU. You'd much rather, Chip Kelly is a great guy, but it's not like Mariota
Definitely.
was drafted in the first round because of Chip Kelly, right? So, throwing a bunch of different timelines there together. But what do you think is
Well,
more
that could
achievable?
be a debate, but that's not related to the Big 12, so we're not going to get into
Yeah.
that.
Well, but what do you think is more realistic? That like
I think
Gabriel's coming to
definitely the latter
OU?
option that you presented,
Yeah.
because like obviously, I mean, the writing's on the wall, like that, like you said, the fact that he announced his transfer so quickly after Caleb Williams announced he's going into the portal. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know, in my opinion. And obviously, the door is open for Williams to return. Like I saw that Venables hasn't like canceled his scholarship, which I guess is a thing that teams can do when a guy enters the portal. So obviously the door is still open, but I think it's kind of shutting.
Well, let's get into the hypotheticals about where we think Williams could go. Right? It's nowhere in the Big 12. Somewhere in
No,
the Big 12.
nowhere in the Big 12.
Yeah.
Iowa State needs a quarterback.
They do have an opening. He just loved beating him at home so much last year that he wants to go there.
Yeah.
At home as in Norman.
He saw their 40,000 seat stadium and was like, "Whoa, what is this?" Yeah, I was just blown away.
Yeah, just thrilling.
So obviously the biggest name that's been around the most recently is Georgia, which kind of runs counter to how I viewed his statement. I'm sure y'all saw the whole statement he posted and whatnot, where he talked about, developing for the NFL and whatnot. And obviously, I mean, I can't fault a kid trying to do that and trying to get developed and end up going number 1 in the draft and all. I mean, that's just an amazing achievement. But I hear that and I see Georgia and I'm like, okay, Georgia with the same head coach who kept Jake Fromm over Justin Fields and Jacob Eason, I think his name was, who's now like a backup in the NFL, I'm pretty sure. Like, okay. Like, sure, that if you end up at Georgia, sure, that's totally what you're looking for. Which Stafford obviously is a good example, but that was a whole different regime and over a decade ago. I heard a lot of Miami because they were linked with bringing Joe Brady back to the college game, which I know Caleb Williams was pretty much between OU and LSU during his recruitment because Joe Brady was still there at LSU and he was going to commit that year, but then Brady left, and that opened up the door to be like, hey, Lincoln Riley's the next best thing and all, and ended up at OU. So I don't see that happening anymore because it seems like they just hired a OC today. I can't remember who it is, but I saw that. So doors kind of closed on Miami. So, but that obviously leaves the, like I said earlier, the first one everyone thought of, and USC. And I think that's what's going to happen. Just based on things I've been hearing and seeing and all. A lot of it is kind of the NIL portion of it and the deals he can get from that. And it seems like Georgia had a good offer, but I have heard through the grapevine and all that it's not really speaking to the Williams family. So I think USC is where he's going to end up.
Georgia,
which pains me a little bit, but at the same time, I kind of just shrug at it at this point.
Georgia to me doesn't make a whole lot of sense because they have Vandergriff. Aren't they the same class as well?
Yeah, and so the funny thing that comes up with that is, I don't know if y'all remember, but Vandergriff was committed to OU before Williams was.
Right.
And then decommitted New Year's Day. God, was that 2020? I think. Yeah. Well, because I remember you were there, Jake, because we were at a buddy's lake house and all. And I remember telling you about that, and I was like, hold up, this is crazy. Like, we just lost like a 5-star QB. I was like, oh no. Only for Williams to commit that summer. So I think that'd be wild if he ended up going to Georgia, because I bet Vandegrift would transfer out then. Maybe he'll end up at OU. No, I'm just kidding. But that would be interesting, is those two kind of always be linked. And they already kind of are, but I feel like that would be an even deeper dynamic then. And they do have another kid coming in this next year also that's like, I think, a 4 or 5 star. So they've got a pretty packed QB room, and obviously the incumbent starters of walk on, and they have JT Daniels too. So, I mean, I might sound like a homer, but I think Caleb Williams would beat all those guys in a competition. But I just can't see him going there at this point. Definitely thought it was pretty likely and realistic a couple days ago. But
side note, it looks like Miami hired one of the old Oregon guys that was there with Cristobal, Brian McClendon. So
was that the receivers coach?
Yes.
Oh, he was the interim head coach for the Alum Bowl. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So he got hired as their co-offensive coordinator. Does Cristobal also call plays?
I don't think so. That's kind of a dying breed, having a head coach that calls plays. I think Riley's one of the last few, and I've kind of stopped being a fan of that the last couple of years.
Riley, Ryan Day.
Does Day call plays?
I think so.
Okay. I didn't know if you did or not. Kiffin wasn't the play caller. That was Levy.
He wasn't?
Oh.
Interesting.
Like, that's like confirmed. Like, I know Thamel tweeted about that. It might have been Feldman. I don't know why. I get Pete Thamel and Feldman confused all the time.
If you were Caleb Williams, where would you go?
USC, easily.
That's probably the easy decision. Like,
I don't know why you wouldn't go to Georgia, or let's say, I don't know who the quarterback is at LSU, to be honest, but I don't think it's
they got
LSU
a kid coming in this year.
LSU is like okay, that's not happening, but it'd be Georgia or USC, and I think it's got to be USC just because it's going to be him. It's going to be just straight up him.
Yeah.
It's weird for me to think about Stetson Bennett being a 2-star guy, having the career he's had so far. I mean, that stuff, there will be a 30 for 30 about Stetson Bennett if he wins the national championship here, right? Like, it's just a bizarre up and down swing for him to play an amazing, game, year this year. Never be in Heisman Trophy consideration, because I get it. He's 5'11", and we're really talking about Georgia's defense here in the run game. But at the end of the day, it seems too easy / just not the Georgia thing to do, to get Caleb Williams for like 2 years or a year or whatever it would be, right?
Yeah, but I think if they lose again to Bama in the national championship, I think Kirby Smart's got to start thinking about what can we do to go to that next level. Because obviously, I think Georgia's nearly on par in that same tier as Bama. Because obviously Alabama's the best team in college football. That's just undisputed. Everyone agrees with that. But I think Georgia's like right there. But they need that one final piece to bring them up there. And I think everyone would agree on what that final piece is. And that's a quarterback that's a blue chip, like a really talented guy. Because Stetson's a good QB, but I don't think he's like that guy,
Yeah. I mean,
and so if they
yeah.
lose, then I think Kirby might be like, okay, we got to do something. And then I could see them pulling Williams in, because I think he could be that guy. I mean, that's about as ideal of a situation as you want to be in to win. Now, my issue with it earlier was about claiming NFL development is the reasoning behind it, because that's obviously they don't really have a track record of that. But if he wants to win, then that's the spot to go and win, like, now.
Yeah, well, also, if you go to USC and you put up ungodly numbers, you're going to get drafted high. If you go to Georgia and you put up ungodly numbers, you're definitely going to get drafted high.
Well, he's going to get drafted. I think he's going to get drafted anywhere, is the thing.
But which is easier to raise your profile at, right? I mean, you can put up ungodly numbers in Pac-12 after dark, and no one's going to blink an eye about drafting you first, second, third, or fourth overall. Whereas you put up some decent numbers at Georgia, maybe it exposes you a little bit more. And I'm just thinking about it from that side of it, because right now, as you said,
that's a good point.
As you said, no one's taking Caleb Williams like in their head right now in the 3rd round, right? But where's the bigger door opening for that possibility? I think it's playing against, let's just face it, better defenses in the SEC, or even better defense in the Big 12 than whatever defenses are in the Pac 12. Because, I mean, whatever UCLA is doing on defense, it did not work against Arizona State. I'll tell you guys that much earlier this season because they just got housed by Arizona State and Herm Edwards. But that was basically like Arizona State's quarterback just run all over UCLA, and me going, okay, what the heck's the deal? Where Caleb Williams, I think he, for lack of a better term, fits into a Pac-12 type offense better than an SEC type offense. Yeah, just run and gun.
Yeah,
I agree.
He's well, and also like to go back to the NFL stuff. Riley is starting quarterbacks in the NFL. Nobody else does. So like if that's what you're going for, Lincoln is probably the guy that you want to be with.
Yeah, I mean, he's coached 3 current starting NFL quarterbacks. We're all at OU. So, yeah. Well, Kirby Smart's track record isn't great, and it's really great defensively because he's gotten a 2-star quarterback to the national championship. But, we're talking about, I think what we'd like to see happen is like Georgia really have a chance to upset Alabama because this is just getting annoying at this point. Like Bryce Young, Heisman Trophy winner. Year before then, Devontae Smith, Heisman Trophy winner. Year before then, I think, it just after a while, it's like, okay, really? We're still doing, we're doing this? Like, there's not so many upsets. So it's, in my head, I'm going, okay, well, if Caleb Williams goes to Georgia, then all of a sudden I really do view Georgia as a huge potential upset to Alabama. And Monday night could change my entire view of this, and we could see, what Georgia upsets Alabama, beats them, and goes on. I don't think the spread's huge in the game. I don't think it's Alabama's a clear and away favorite.
Well, that's the crazy thing is
Yeah.
that, and I agree with you. That's an upset if they win, but in the eyes of Vegas, I'm pretty sure that Georgia's favored by like 3. I think Jake and I were talking about that earlier. That's crazy to me because I do not see it that way at all. But
I don't know what from the bowl games from the playoff games would make me think otherwise. Like Alabama, yeah, Cincinnati hung around when it was 17-6, but then that still is a 2-score game. That's not 17-6 isn't, 13-6, for example, right? So we're not okay. Well, there was a it's just okay. Alabama was controlled the whole entire game. Georgia definitely was controlled the whole entire game. But I don't know. It's so hard to see from those playoff games if I'm like, okay, but if Michigan and Cincinnati played against each other head to head, I don't know if I feel better about either team after the playoff games, right? And that kind of brings me to Georgia, Alabama. It's like, okay, well, we've seen these 2 teams play against each other already. One was clearly better than the other. And the one that was clearly better than the other still has their Heisman Trophy winning quarterback and still has an amazing defense and still they're not missing a lot of guys. I think they are missing their wide receiver though, right? Or is Williams able to come
Mechie
back?
is hurt.
Yeah, Mechie. Yeah.
Yeah,
but they just had another kid step up. Ja'Cory Brooks is his name, I think. Jake.
Yeah, he's a
freshman. Yeah, they just had another kid step up.
But I'm pretty sure Mechie like torched Georgia. So, if I remember correctly, I think
I'm sure he had a good game, but I just remember Jameson Williams torching them.
Yeah.
I mean, he got loose on a couple deep balls and like a couple just runs after catch and all.
Yeah, I don't know that. It's hard for me to preview that game because we already saw it played. Am I supposed to be? Because this isn't like the Alabama LSU rematch that we saw, in 2011. Like, it's not where the game is freaking 9-6.
Yeah.
It was 45-31. and it probably wasn't even that close. So but the fact that Georgia's favored, I don't understand.
I guess Vegas just decided.
The most recent time they matched up in the cultural playoff, Alabama won.
True.
Georgia's lost.
That game went to OT though. No.
Yeah.
Because that was the Tua breakout party and all. Yeah.
Yeah, the cherry picking stats here thing for me is working out a little bit, but it's not into the overtime feasibility of it. What's interesting is that Georgia's lost 7 games in a row against Alabama, including a 26-23 defeat in overtime. Okay, so yeah, it was an overtime. The cultural playoff national championship after 2017 season. So are we all picking Alabama We have any other disagreements here with that?
It's just so hard to bet against Nick Saban, and
It is.
everyone thought after losing to A&M this year, like, oh, Georgia's going to beat him. Like, I mean, people were just hammering like Georgia's going to win the SEC, and it's just so hard to bet against Nick Saban. Even playing the same team twice in a year, I mean, it's so hard to beat a team twice. But and there are scenarios where I could see Georgia winning the national championship, but again, it all comes back to just it's Nick Saban, and it's the juggernaut that he's created at Alabama.
I will say the Alabama juggernaut doesn't make me as mad as it used to. It's hard to, as long as the games are fun, I don't really care, to be honest. Like, I
think that's why it's gotten more annoying to me, is because the games aren't as much fun. Like college football playoff games, I'll tell you what. I mean, it's the New Year's Eve bowl games. You know, my dad, littlest brother, and I are in a hotel room in Phoenix before the Fiesta Bowl the next day, going, "Hey, you know what? Like, let's watch college football." All three of us hang out, huge football fans. And within a couple minutes into each of the two playoff games, like, all right, whatever. Yeah, okay. Then granted, it stayed a little bit longer for the Alabama Cincinnati game, but it was like, okay, what? All right, okay. After that game, we'll get hyped up for Michigan, Georgia, and it's okay. It wasn't much. And seeing two SEC teams in there all the time just gets old. I really wish a Big 12 or a Pac 12 or an ACC team had made it instead, just because it's. I mean,
well, and
I don't know if Utah would have done better. I don't know who's the best team out of the ACC this year. I'm struggling to even
Pitt.
think about it. Pitt, yeah, okay,
Pitt won the ACC, yeah.
that's right. So Pitt play Michigan State, like that was a fun game, but that's what annoys. I've gotten much more respect for example like Tom Brady, Bill Belichick. Over the years, I get much more respect for those guys because they're always in it. They always win. It's the NFL where you actually have a draft and teams can make dumb decisions or smart decisions in the draft. When it comes to college football, it's just such a, okay, well, we're the best schools, so you're the best players, so you're going to want to come to the best school, and it just follows that trend. And Saban's built it up to where it's such a certain degree where it's not even the guys who are like, there are guys going, okay, well, I could go to Alabama, play for a season or two, and then sit for a season or two or maybe even three, and then all of a sudden be the best player. Like Alabama got the best overall transfer running back out of Georgia Tech.
Yeah.
Right, as running back.
Yeah,
And,
Gibbs is it the last name?
like they're not going to miss. I don't think they're going to miss a beat. On the other hand, Oklahoma State, we lose Tanner McAllister today, and lose is a strong word, but we have our safety transferred to Ohio State to follow Jim Knowles. That will be something that we probably notice. That's something that we'll talk about multiple times between now and the start of the season. And okay, really notice. Whereas they're Bama. They're not worried about anything. They get the third or fourth best wide receiver out of Ohio State, and all of a sudden he could have maybe won the Heisman. Who knows, right? Like instead his teammate did.
Yeah, it's, I think each of you I've had multiple conversations with about this, but it's like that odd talent shift where it's like all the recruiting has shifted down here, but then a lot of the problem with the Texas area is either they can't retain the kids or they're all just splitting up so much that there's not enough talent to keep the sustainability of other programs. Like OU, for example, is recruiting everywhere now. They can't just recruit Texas. There's a reason that a team like Nebraska sucks now. They leave the Big 12 and they don't get Texas kids anymore because that's all they used to recruit back in their heyday. But I mean, Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, when you have your South Florida kids, you have your Atlanta kids, and then you have your dispersed areas throughout that are just producing and producing. And then in Texas, you've got your best three receivers that go to Ohio State 3 years in a row. Like when that happens to you, just from the Big 12 perspective, especially, like it's tough and it's frustrating, like being an OSU fan and going, well, all the players are in my backyard. And I'm like, well, why can't we compete? That's why. Not saying the recruits we get are bad, but like Georgia didn't go after Will Anderson because they didn't think he would be good enough. That's a direct quote from Kirby Smart. He's from Hampton, Georgia, which is like not a couple miles, but it's south of Atlanta. It's where the racetrack is. So
it's in the state of Georgia. I mean, that's all you got to say, right? He didn't even recruit the maybe best player in his own state.
Right. And I mean, the inarguable guy that probably should have been second in Heisman voting.
Yeah. I mean, a defensive lineman being second in the Heisman Trophy conversation is bizarre.
And then blanking out against Georgia.
Well, yeah, but
it's just, it's stuff like that where it's like, I mean, and then the best player goes to Jackson State this year. So, you know, it's pretty bizarre that like that talent shift, but then how Saban is just able to adjust, basically just adjust where he's recruiting. Same with Georgia, because that was a big problem with Richt, is the inability to keep recruits in. And so I don't foresee this ending anytime soon, but because the football here is not getting worse.
Well, I'll ask you guys both about the Big 12 a little bit more here. So, well, I'm sure we'll have you on whenever the date of OU and Texas leaving the Big 12 is inevitable. We just don't know what date it'll be, right? It's whenever they all figure it all out or something. No one knows, really. And I'm sure we'll have you on for that. But in the meantime, OU's still playing Big 12 schools, so it's Texas. How do you think OU will be coming back this next season?
I mean, there's a recurring theme here. If I could sit here and be a homer and be like, we're going to win the Big 12 easily, we're going to go to the playoff again. But I mean, realistically, we could win the Big 12 again. Like, I mean, it's obviously going to be difficult. New coach, it's hard to do. A lot of roster turnover, not as much as people would think or I thought would happen initially when our former head coach left. But it's still arguably the most talented roster in the Big 12, maybe behind Texas. But the problem with Texas has never been a lack of talent. And I mean, we have the talent to do it. We have an incredible coaching staff. Like, I honestly think the defensive staff this upcoming years, I would call it elite. Like, I mean, with the exception of the DC, Ted Roof, but he seems like a great guy. He's getting us in a lot of doors recruiting. And I also think he's more of a placeholder because obviously we just hired Todd Bates away from Clemson, their defensive tackles coach, and gave him the whole co-DC associate head coach title. So, I mean, he's obviously being prepared to take over that role in the near future. And I can't imagine that Brent Venables isn't going to be involved on a play-by-play basis with the defense. I know he's not going to call plays, I'm pretty sure. But he's obviously going to be involved in that, so I don't want to put too much onus on the defensive coordinator position. But beyond that, I mean, it's just a ridiculous staff. And we kept the offensive staff together for the most part, besides Dennis Simmons. But I think letting Kel Gundy take over that role full-time, because he was the inside wide receivers coach, and now they elevated him to just full-time, the full room. So not a lot of turnover in the offense. So those guys have the same faces, same coaches they've been working with. Added a new offensive coordinator, Levy, which Jake knows I'm on record as having some questions about that hire for reasons that aren't related to football. But football-wise, that's a great hire. But beyond that,
yeah, his father-in-law is a little bit of a weird dude, right?
Never heard of him. Who could that be?
No idea. No relation to the current Big 12 champion.
And his brother, his brother-in-law as well.
Yeah. But I mean, strictly football speaking, that's a pretty great hire. But so, I mean, we're poised to do what OU does and compete for the Big 12 championship and all, and go possibly into the postseason, into a decent bowl game, or dare I say, on the cusp of a playoff appearance. I'm not thinking we're going to make the playoff this year, but I think we'll be on the cusp.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I think that's incredibly fair, but I do want to ask you the Oklahoma State question from the OU perspective, right? Because I think that there's easily, maybe it's too strong of a word. I don't rule out OU making the Big 12 championship next year. I don't rule it out really until I see them miss it for like 3 years in a row and something weird happening, right? Where you're not getting, for example, like, is it Mario Williams? He's still there, right?
No, he just
transferred. He's the freshman wide receiver. Who's the other?
Yeah.
There's okay.
Marvin Mims.
Marvin Mims. Yeah. So
and Theo Weese is staying as well.
Yeah.
And it's if Mims had transferred, I'd be like, well, I mean, maybe that's another domino, right? But
Yeah.
as it's being said, you guys went and hired a great defensive coordinator who, granted, I don't think is the guy I would have been excited about, but I'm also not going to be excited about whoever OU hires because I'm an Oklahoma State fan. So with all that into consideration,
fair.
I go, okay, I'm not dropping OU off the radar. But Oklahoma State has a lot of guys offensively returning. Not everyone, but a lot of guys. We have a lot of guys defensively returning. Granted, still not everyone, and not our DC.
Yeah.
How do you view Oklahoma State's chances of Big 12 championship, or just really just how we're going to do in the Big 12 next year?
I'm not quite sure. Like I honestly have no idea about the roster construction going into next year. So hearing that there are a lot of returning starters is pretty informative for me. I will say, before I make like a prediction, I will say I think the next couple of years are just vastly important to Oklahoma State. Like they need to do something in the Big 12, as in like they need to at least go back to the Big 12 championship game. I would say at least twice because, well, the new teams come in 23, right?
24, I think, but yeah.
Okay, 23 or 24. So there's a year or two until then. And that's when kind of the Big 12 becomes the new Big 12. And I think that Oklahoma State is probably the best poised to kind of be the top dog in that new Big 12. And so I think the next couple of years are just absolutely vital to being able to prove that they can do that. So I think if Oklahoma State makes the Big 12 championship in the next couple of years again, which I think is possible, it sounds like there's a lot of returning starters. And I'm not sure what the new defensive hire is going to be, but I mean, same talent on the roster and seeing a lot of guys that are just veteran starters and all that have been pretty fortunate to have the COVID year and whatnot. Not a dig, but it's a good thing. I mean, I think Oklahoma State can compete. I'm not sure what I thought going into this year. I don't think I was that high on Oklahoma State going into this year. And not like Big 12 champion competing high, but I think Oklahoma State's always, 8-win, 9-win, 4 in my eyes. But I think better than that this next year.
Calvin and I at the beginning of the year were at like 7.
Really?
I'm
just too optimistic then. If the OSU guys are saying that.
Well, one, I was down on the team because of two things. One, I had seen Spencer Sanders being injured to the end of every season. Like, this is the first year he's played a full season. He still didn't even play a full season because he missed the home opener. But this is the first year he's played a full season healthy, right? So it was like, okay, well, putting that into account, okay, how are we going to be with changing our offensive types and play calling, whatever, if we have to move to Shane and a bunch of other stuff, right? Then there's me halfway through the season going, Shane Illingworth should have a chance. And then all of a sudden we end the season how we do, and Sanders looks incredible. And granted, he had a fumble, but like he threw for career highs, career stuff in the Fiesta Bowl against what I think of as a good Notre Dame team. They're the 5th in the country, right? So no one's discrediting Notre Dame, right? I mean, at the end of the day, I know some people who have discredited the win. I've seen it on Twitter message boards or whatever, because it's like, okay, well, who did Notre Dame play? But 5th team in the country, like they're one spot out of the playoff. We cannot discredit the win. So I know Jake and I are both on the same point of like, okay, well, are we going to beat Texas? And I was going, no. We lose Chuba Hubbard, we lose Tylan Wallace, who are our receivers, who are our running backs. That's really how the team has to be fueled when we have Sanders. But instead, it's fueled completely by something I didn't even see coming, our defense. Because Jim Knowles' defense was really good statistically years past, but it would have been on the turnover side of it. It had not been on these holding the opponents to not scoring.
How long was his tenure at Oklahoma State?
I believe 4 years.
Okay. Because he's one of those coaches. I know he hasn't been there. He wasn't there overly long, but one of those names that I kind of just always assumed he'd been there for a while. Like I didn't recall him joining the coaching staff there. I just remembered him being there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it was 2018 to 2021. So
okay. Oh, that's more recent than I thought.
The interesting thing with the Big 12 looking forward, outside of like Oklahoma and Texas, is how long does Aranda stay at Baylor? I can't imagine that he's going to be there for 2 more years. Someone's going to throw him a bag. Like they just are. It's going to happen, and it's not going to be Baylor. I know he just signed a contract extension. I don't care. Like I don't foresee him being there in 2 years. I also don't foresee Luke Fickell being at Cincinnati in 2 years.
Okay. And then hypotheticals, where do you think those two would end up? Doesn't have to be a specific team, maybe like a conference.
I think Fickle will go to the Big Ten.
I think I know where you're thinking of.
Yeah, because I do think that, and I know this is like a, not exactly a one-track mind thing, but I think like Ryan Day, I think Ohio State comes out next year and just blows the doors off everybody, like Will and I talked about a couple days ago. I think they come out and do that. I don't know, outside of probably Michigan State, I don't foresee, especially given the Harbaugh stuff, I don't see the Big Ten being very good. It'll be what it is normally, but I don't think Michigan's going to be Michigan next year, what they were this year, for example. So
Jim
I could see
Harbaugh
Ryan,
might be leaving too. You never know.
right, and I could see Ryan Day maybe taking an NFL job and Fickle going there. I don't know. I mean, would Fickle go to Ohio State or go to Michigan?
I don't think. I mean,
I
he's an Ohio
couldn't.
State guy, like through and
I
through. Like
I
that's.
agree. Like I couldn't see it, but they have to pick up the phone.
Oh yeah. I mean, yeah, even as a Michigan State fan, Michigan's one of those jobs that, like, okay, a head coach, even like another blue blood, is going to answer that call. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but would
But
Michigan call it? Would Michigan call Aranda?
They
possibly,
should.
I
They
don't see
They
why
should.
should.
not. Like,
They will. I mean, from that they will. They will.
Like of the names that are at lesser schools, like Baylor's not Michigan, for example. Of the names that are at lesser schools, Dave Aranda is probably the best one.
his name came up a ton with the USC and Washington
USC job.
vacancies, because I know he's a Cali guy
Yeah,
originally, like from California. But I guess it didn't seem like he had that much interest in either of those. So maybe like a more recently powerful blue blood would interest him in Michigan.
yeah.
But
So I personally, it doesn't seem likely that they're still there, in my opinion, at least.
With that being said, I'm not necessarily discrediting either of those schools. Weirdly enough, they keep hiring really good coaches.
Yeah.
Cincinnati, of course, has Brian Kelly before Luke Fickell. And before David Aranda, we're talking about an NFL current head coach, Matt Rule. So they're not bad at hiring good coaches. But with that being said, I think it is Oklahoma State's time to get back to the Big 12 championship for sure. I think
absolutely.
that's got to be the expectation that in the next 5 seasons. So when we redo this podcast here in 2027, and we're talking about Oklahoma State's, they've gone to 2 more Big 12 championships in the next 5 years. Because I'm not every year is we're not OU. We're not Texas of old, when they first joined the Big 12, I guess. But what Texas won the national championship in 2005, but it was a year ago yesterday. It was 2005 yesterday, whatever. We're going back 16 years. I think it's Oklahoma State's time to really shine, to be honest, just because of the changes in the Big 12 and take advantage of that opportunity. They were playing Houston in the Big 12 championship. Maybe we're playing Baylor again. We're playing whoever, but getting back to that in what will be a 12-team conference, right, is got to be the ground floor level of what we expect here over the next 5 years. Because I think that the team is – I don't see a reason that we couldn't make the Big 12 championship next year, just based on the fact that, listen, our defense is pretty darn good. We have a lot of returning starters. Granted, not every returning starter. The MVP at the Fiesta Bowl, like Malcolm Rodriguez, is gone. Our cornerbacks are gone. But we have other guys. Our defensive line is going to be incredible. Trace Ford is going to come back from injury, knock on wood. Colin Oliver and Colin Clay should come back too. So, those guys are really, really good as well. So
here's what I keep thinking that I think would be a good kind of addendum to this conversation is, who do we think can realistically compete for the Big 12 next season? Because obviously I think OU will, and I think we all agree on that. I think we agree Oklahoma State can compete, but I only can really see 2 other teams possible there.
Baylor,
Baylor, of course, and then I think Texas maybe if they put it together. But like I said earlier, lack of talent has never been their problem. So
I think the Baylor thing is interesting because I wonder if Gary Bohannon comes back, like I told Calvin this, if Gary Bohannon's playing in the Big 12 championship, we win.
After seeing him
Like-
play against Ole Miss, it didn't look like he was all world. 5 passes he completed, right, Jake?
And that's not like a amazing SEC defense either.
What did we say since we were talking about the lovely DJ Durkin earlier? They were the 97th best defense in the country. Isn't that the stat that I
Yes.
saw?
Yeah, I dropped that stat earlier and had to
Yeah.
go look it up and verify. And yes, they were 97th in total defense this year. And DJ Durkin, for those unaware, is now the defensive coordinator at Texas A&M.
Yeah. If you want to, we're talking about lovely coaches here today. So if you want to go look at it,
God.
Only the best.
only-
I really like Oklahoma State's chances, but I think it's Oklahoma State, Baylor, OU, and it depends on how Quinn Ewers is, really. Just,
Yeah.
just Texas has the, like you said, they have the talent. What I've told Jake several times before, the weirdest thing about watching NFL games right now with a Texas grad a bunch is that there's a Texas grad on like every NFL team, it seems, at least, right? I know I have it almost memorized, Oklahoma State grads, and I'm like, oh yeah, there's the guy in the Dolphins, there's the guy in the Bengals, there's whoever. But seeing how many Texas guys are on other NFL teams is like, oh, they definitely have the talent. They definitely get guys to the league. So if they can just put it all together schematically and beat OU or play them super close, but win every other game, we're talking about a Texas team that, hey, I mean, how many 3 years ago won the Sugar Bowl? So it's not like this Texas team has been bad for a while. And Sam Ehlinger, I don't think was the greatest quarterback of all time. Well, definitely size-wise, he's definitely a smaller guy. But Quinn Ewers has definitely got a higher floor than Sam Ehlinger had, for sure,
Definitely,
right?
yeah.
So he's going to raise and just make them better, and it's going to be up to them.
And the thing about Texas is Ehlinger was the best Texas quarterback since Vince Young. Like
Colt McCoy.
Colt McCoy. I always forget.
Colt was a Heisman finalist, like a runner-up, I'm pretty sure, one year.
I always
the
forget
runner-up,
about
pretty
him.
sure, 1 year.
Played in the national championship too, right?
Yeah, he busted his shoulder
for a little bit.
I mean, played for he took that team to national championship.
He did take that team to a national championship appearance, yeah.
But it's
that's what kicked off the Saban dynasty at Bama.
Yeah, wasn't it Marcel Darius, that large man that like busted up Colt McCoy's shoulder? Anyways, yeah, it's just like I agree though, Calvin. If Ewers is supposed to be as advertised, and aren't they returning arguably one of the best receivers in the country?
Yeah,
He's a freshman as well.
Yeah,
but I think what Texas needed, and my dad actually told me about this. He said they needed to get a lot of those Tom Herman guys out because they were soft as baby poop. So, I mean,
talented though, that's for sure.
Talented for sure, but it's just like with the filming on the bus, right? Like stuff like stuff that
forgot all about that.
Stuff that shouldn't be happening within your football program. Like, I'm sorry, I played football. Like, I know you guys played sports in high school. The stuff that is said by coaches to you should not be blown out for the public to hear. It just shouldn't, under any circumstance. And sometimes it's good. It's not always bad, but sometimes it is bad. And I'm sorry, the public just doesn't need to hear that. And the fact that someone filmed it is pretty indicative of because I like Sark, the hopeful culture that he's trying to get rid of.
Yeah, I didn't have really any issues at all with what that coach said. Besides,
Yeah,
I mean,
me
of
neither.
course, you don't want it. Well, you don't want your coaches like publicly saying words that are not safe for TV. Granted, but it wasn't a public thing, right? So I don't have any problem with what the coach said. It was definitely not meant to be public because that's why we don't see the coach's face in front of the camera, right, and stuff. So I don't know. There's a weird thought process when it comes to Texas because Texas always has a top 5 recruiting class. Like when I see, okay, Georgia and Alabama have the number 1 recruiting classes always, and they're always in the national championship game or in the cultural playoffs, whatever. That's great, but we're not talking about the full picture of saying, okay, well, Ole Miss has been top. A&M's been top. Like, they're up there every year, it seems, but they're really up there on the preseason ranking, and they start falling off a little bit, and then they're up there because they beat Bama on some weird fluky thing, or they beat Bama on the last second field goal, and then they drop off again. It's just a bunch of, okay, well, when Texas is, we make the joke, Texas is back, right? Well, they're back to me when they make it to the Big 12 championship for, 2 out of 3 years or something, right? Or they're playing in really competitive games at the end of the season, for
Not
multiple
losing
different
to
quarterbacks.
Kansas.
Well, yeah, but when
That's a start.
well, they're back to me when they can switch between one quarterback graduating to the next quarterback on the team and not fall off, not
Yeah.
right. And I'm interested to see like who is the starting quarterback for them week 1, because they had Casey Thompson transfer out, but Glenn Ewers is not taking a college football snap yet. So is he going to start week 1? You would think he's 5-star and all this highly touted stuff, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, the other kid they've got, Hudson Card. I mean, he was a pretty highly ranked recruit as well, but I can't imagine Quinn Ewers would transfer to Texas without the promise of you're going to start.
Quinn Ewers really he's a guy who's out there getting the bag. He basically he finessed the whole system. Props to him.
It's hilarious.
We get in this out with this small 1-minute story I'll try to sum up. But basically, Quinn Ewers was not able to make money at the University of Texas, whatever previous NIL deals and guidelines they had at the University of Texas. It's now since changed. But then he transfers to Ohio State, gets on NIL deals there, and then it's rumored he got $1 million to $2 million plus at least of NIL deals, and then he transfers back to UT where he apparently wanted to go anyways, and he's from Texas. I don't blame him. And now, of course, he's still probably cashing in even more. If Texas's linemen are making $50K a year, he's probably making a little bit more. You would guess. And that's off one NIL deal that the offensive lineman signed. So
he's on the Texas A&M salary. There was actually an article released about, because Texas A&M now has isn't it the greatest recruiting class of all time?
By overall points, yes.
By overall, like the 247, the point, whatever.
Which not by average rating of each player, because I think Bama still hasn't beat this year even. But by overall points, they have like the greatest recruiting class of all time, which is pretty crazy, pretty shocking to see from A&M. That oil money's really hitting.
I just saw an article that someone shared on Twitter, and it said basically how A&M boosters funded this recruiting class.
I mean, we're talking about an A&M team that has 6 5-star guys for next season, for 2022.
And they might actually have a quarterback.
They have 19 4-stars.
Wegman. Like, I don't know if y'all saw even the highlights of that All-American Bowl, the Under Armour one this past weekend, but my dad's an Aggie alum. So, of course, he was all like, oh, yeah, like 6 guys in here and all. And he was showing me some of the clips of Wegman. And that kid, he's going to be he's pretty for real, I will say.
Does he start day 1?
I've got a coworker who's an Aggie also, and he was saying, "Oh, Max Johnson transferred, and I feel like he'll start." And I'm like, "Why?" Like,
ew, he's bad.
Wegman is Jimbo's guy. Like, Jimbo's been hyping that kid up this whole recruiting cycle. Like, he's like, this kid's the best quarterback in the country, and all. I mean, I don't see why they wouldn't.
Jimbo is a snake oil salesman.
I mean, here's my thing about recruiting though. Stanford has the 16th best recruiting class for 2022.
Shaw, man.
North Carolina has the 8th best. Mac Brown making moves. And Kentucky has the 11th best. If you had told me those 3 teams have the top 25, had all of top 25 recruiting classes, I'd be like, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, it's just bizarre. Oklahoma State is the 26th best. Yeah, we have 6 4-star, 0 5-star, and 11 3-star, if I'm reading this correctly. It's just that type of stuff. Rutgers has a 28th best recruiting class. They are 1 point difference from Oklahoma State in the recruiting class.
Greg Schiano. Who's the head coach there now?
Greg Schiano.
Oh my god.
Right? So recruiting's just a weird deal because we
For
could be
sure.
talking about A&M winning 2 national championships or having the exact same year they've currently had for like 4 more seasons in a row until that quarterback we're talking about now, who's not even on the team, transfers to a different team or goes to the NFL. I mean, it's just recruiting such a weird right here. Maryland with the 29th recruiting class. Like, what are we? I don't know.
They have an Alabama guy too.
Mm.
So
kind of bizarre. Well, with all being said, do we have any other topics we have not covered we want to? We're kind of wrapping this one up.
Oklahoma State has no offense in basketball.
And on that note, thanks so much for listening to the latest episode of the CGA Tour podcast. Please follow at the CGA Tour on Twitter and Instagram for more. And Oklahoma State will find a 3-point shot by the end of the season.
Maybe.
Probably not. So anyways, thank you guys so much for listening. I'll catch you guys again soon. Peace.